Today we talk about sperm shape, why it matters, why it might not, and whether teratozoospermia is truly a fertility roadblock or just a misunderstood number.
I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.
So let's start with the basics. Sperm morphology. It sounds like a fancy medical word, but really, it just means what does a sperm look like? See, under the microscope, we're looking for the sperm that are perfectly shaped. Smooth oval heads, intact midpieces, and long straight tails. Seems simple, right? Well, not quite. The first thing you have to understand about the number is it's not a raw number. It's a percentage, which means potentially, you could have a lot of normal sperm, but have a low morphology because the ratio of your normal sperm compared to the abnormal sperm may be represented, but the absolute number is not. An example would be if you had 4% normal sperm and had 100 million sperm, you would have 4 million total moving sperm that are morphologically normal. But if you only had 10 million sperm and even have 10% of the sperm were morphologically normal, you'd only have 1 million morphological normal sperm. And that's a really big difference between those two, even though the number sounded better in the second situation. The other issue with morphology is it's somewhat subjective. Between different labs and different technicians, there's going to be stringent criteria. That's basically like my wife looks like the most beautiful woman on earth, and someone else may not think that. Although I should point out they are wrong. She is the most beautiful person on earth. Also the sweetest. But morphology doesn't have an absolute look. It's in the eyes of the beholder. Now, there is some general rules to it, right? No one's going to say I'm on the same level of Brad Pitt, although I wish. And this grading has changed over time. Back in 1980, someone who was called normal then would not be considered normal now. The criteria we use currently is called the Kruger strict morphology. When I say strict, I mean strict. Think of it like the Olympic gymnastics of sperm, only the flawless form scores. Anything even slightly off, big heads, small heads, double shells, bent necks, they get tossed in an abnormal pile. But the real question comes, does it matter? If you find out you only have 2% normal sperm, that's a scary thing to be told. As a matter of fact, a lot of people get very worried about it. And there's some clinics that will even push you into treatment saying this is the cause of your infertility. But the question is it? And this is the point of this episode. The simple answer is no, it doesn't matter. But it's always not that simple. See, most fertile men do have morphologies below 4%. And most studies show that there's no consistent correlation between morphology and ability to conceive naturally. Even men with 0% morphology have fathered children naturally. But the important part to understand is that the rest of the semen analysis is also normal. So isolated teratozoospermia, meaning isolated sperm morphology issues, in a situation where the rest of the semen analysis is normal, does not have really any effect on your fertility. And so if you have a doctor telling you, oh, this is the cause of your infertility, they are likely wrong. Unless the men have a specific problem with all the sperm. If someone has 0% morphology and they have globozoospermia, where they're rounded-headed sperms with no acrosomes, they will not be able to fertilize. Normally, when someone has teratozoospermia and has lots of abnormal sperm, it's polymorphic, meaning there's multiple different types of issues there. But if it's only one issue that's happening, it may create a problem. So the point is, if you have a morphology issue and the rest of the count is normal, and it's not a monomorphic issue, meaning the same issue in all the sperm, but polymorphic, meaning there's multiple issues, it doesn't appear to affect your chances of getting pregnant. But if you do have a low sperm count, such as oligoacinospermia, and you also have teratozoospermia, now you have oligoacinoteratozoospermia, and that can be a bit of a problem. But this is beyond isolated teratozoospermia, meaning isolated abnormal sperm. And this isn't just my opinion. This has been proven by studies. In a 2024 study by Pelsman, they did a large meta-analysis that failed to show an association between sperm morphology and natural fertility outcomes. Now, it's important to understand that a meta-analysis doesn't prove anything. It just shows that taking a bunch of studies that they maybe didn't actually show what they originally thought they did after seeing multiple studies showing different results. So what about IUIs? If you have abnormal morphology, are IUIs going to be the best thing for you? You would think it'd be better. In reality, it's still ineffective. Now, when I say ineffective, I'm not saying that IUI doesn't work. IUI does work. As a matter of fact, if you have low motile count, or if you have other issues with the sperm, IUIs are great. But what the studies have shown that when you have a total motile count of at least 10 million or more, even with a morphology under 1%, it did not affect the success rates. Now remember, there's that situation where you may have a monomorphic issue that affects all the sperm, and then it would affect it and you'd be going on to IVF at that point. But for everyone else with isolated teratozoospermia, it does not affect your success. So if someone tells you you need to go to IUI because of teratozoospermia, they are wrong. Now, if you have other problems with your sperm and you have teratozoospermia, yes, IUI may be a great option for you. So then it's clear. If you have teratozoospermia, then you need to go on the IVF, right? That's what I'm saying. Well, I'm not saying that either. Unless you have sperm that has a monomorphic issue that affects all the sperm, IVF may not be what's needed. Now, if you do have a problem where the acrosomes are messed up, that's the part that gets into the egg, or if the way it moves are messed up, then you probably won't get pregnant with normal conventional treatments. You might need IVF. But then that brings us to the next question. Does that mean the sperm won't get in? Will the fertilization be lower? Well, if you were with me in training, you would think that absolutely you must do ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where we inject the sperm into the egg. Because when I was trained, if your morphology was 4 or less, you always did ICSI. And that actually stuck around for a really long time until people started actually looking at the data. Now, I'm not saying that ICSI doesn't benefit some people who have teratozoospermia. There are studies that show lower fertilization rates when you have poor morphology. But the weird thing was, if you're just looking at, let's say, the live birth rates, they were similar. So the fertilization rates went down, but the live birth rates were similar, meaning in the end, if you're just looking at who gets pregnant, it didn't really affect it that much. But the thing is, the stakes are high. And because of that, no one wants to have a patient that doesn't get fertilization or has low fertilization. Doesn't matter if you get pregnant, you're still going to be disappointed if only half of them fertilize. And for that reason, we tend to use ICSI a little bit more defensively, not because it's always needed, but because if IVF fails to fertilize, the cycle is lost. The stakes are high. And for that reason, in the industry, we have seemed to push more for ICSI. Now, in other countries, where maybe it doesn't cost anything to do IVF, they're not going to do ICSI. Because if it doesn't work, well, you didn't pay for anything. They don't care. But in the United States, it's different. It does cost a lot, sometimes a whole bunch. And so the stakes are high. And for that reason, ICSI neutralizes the effect of having poor fertilization. Now, I'm not saying ICSI is better than standard insemination. Matter of fact, standard insemination usually has a better fertilization rate. But if there's concern about the sperm, such as morphology issues being the shape, it may not be worth the risk of using standard insemination. And for that reason, a lot of people will go to ICSI. But what's interesting is that number has decreased over the years, even at our clinic. When we first started, because of my training, if you had a morphology of 4.5, you end up having ICSI. Now, we use that you have to be under 3 to use ICSI. And ever since making that switch, we haven't seen a single decrease in fertilization. Now, yes, if your morphology is only 2.5%, you're going to get ICSI at our clinic. Why? Because yes, I'm a little bit scared. I don't want to take the chance of you not having fertilization. But realistically, what do I know? Unless it's a monomorphic issue that affects all the sperm, it's not really going to matter. However, I'm still scared and I'm going to do ICSI. The point is, Studies show there's little to no predictive value for pregnancy outcomes when it comes to teratozoospermia. Yes, it may affect fertilization a little bit, but it's not going to normally affect the pregnancy outcomes. Even the American Society of Reproductive Medicine recommends not basing treatment decisions on morphology alone. I can't tell you how many times I see patients who are coming for a second opinion and the doctor told them, oh, your morphology, that's the reason you guys aren't getting pregnant. And then they get pushed into treatments that they don't need. It doesn't mean morphology doesn't have a time and place. But most of the time, if it's an isolated issue, it doesn't seem to affect things. So, if you're sitting there with a report that says 1 or 2% morphology and you're panicking, take a deep breath. A low number on paper doesn't always translate into a low chance of success. Think of it this way. Sperm morphology is kind of like checking the treads on your tires. Sure, ball tires aren't ideal, but if the engine, the transmission, and the brakes are working, the car still drives. You gotta look at the whole vehicle, not just one worn tire. So what's the takeaway today? Morphology matters in context. You have a low count, low motility, and low morphology. Yeah, we're going to take that seriously. But isolated teratozoospermia, especially when everything else is normal, that's not a cause to jump straight to IVF or to panic. It's a variable, not a verdict. Don't let a scary sperm-shaped score shape your future. Morphology might look ugly under a microscope, but the data says it's often nothing to worry about, especially when everything else looks good. Now, always, as I say, talk to your doctor. Look at the full picture, but just don't let one scary number define your journey. Maybe you're one of those patients who were told that your infertility was due to sperm morphology issues, or you were even told to go on to IVF when you didn't need it. Maybe you have a friend who's been told this. If this is true, hopefully you like this episode. Maybe you're able to help your friend now, and you can tell them that, I just learned from Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday that it actually doesn't matter. Regardless, if you love this show, and especially this episode, give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium, but always keep coming back. I look forward to talking to you again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.